Okay, just to highlight a few of the more useful functions on a basic scientific calculator. Yours may look a bit different from this, but you should have these three keys that I'm particularly highlighting. Key 1 is where we raise things to the power. You see there's a sort of box above the x. The second one is a really good function for division, particularly when you've got more than one thing on the top or on the bottom of the function or the fraction. The third one is a puzzling key for some people, but when you end up with the answer you don't recognize, if you push that button, you will get a decimal equivalent. The S to D is not a particularly good name. It takes you from surd to decimal and backwards, but I'll quickly show you that.
So as an example, let's try this question. Hopefully you will see it's really just a compound interest question in disguise. And this is what we're really being asked to do. Yeah, raise the compounding factor to the power of 10 and multiply it by the principal. So we're going to enter that as 2,000 times 1.035, and we're going to use that number 1 key that I pointed out, which is the x with a square above it. So we're going to use that little box to put in the 10 and get, as a result, 2821 to the nearest pound. So now we've got a present value question, and hopefully you can see that what we really need to do is to divide this by the discounting factor and raise to the power of 15. We're discounting back 15 years. 1.75% becomes this. Remember, the first 2 digits after decimal place is the number of whole percent. And to do that, we're going to use that second key that I pointed out at the beginning. Don't technically need it, but it just documents everything so beautifully when you're putting it into your calculator. So we see we've got a box over a box. We're just going to start typing, put the first principal amount in, and then this big button in the middle is actually to control the cursor. There's these are arrows, and right at the bottom there is a down arrow that takes me down to the bottom, and I press 1075, and I again push the button with the X with the box, and in the box I put 15. So to the nearest pound, that's 5396. And then let's have a look at this one. This is a better example of how this button really works. I've just put a reminder in there. Remember, there's always an invisible multiplication between these terms. Anytime in algebra there are 2 things written together, they're always multiplied together. So just a little reminder there. So here I'm using this button again. And this time I'm going to put 95 times square root of 8. And I'm going to use the cursor down button again. And this time I need 4 raised to the power of 3.5. Now, this is where a lot of people go wrong. Because look, the cursor expecting me to put more decimal places in my power. So I need to say, no, I've stopped entering the power. And I'm going to use now the right cursor arrow. And that's brought it back to the line ready for my next term, multiplied by 2 to the power of 3. And that's it. I just press equals. And I get to 2 decimal places, 0.26. And then one final go, just to show you that third button. So we're being asked to find 2580 divided by 5 squared. So let's use that final button that I wanted to highlight. So I'm going to again use my box over a box key because I like that one. 2580, and bring it down to the bottom. I'm going to put 5 raised to the power of 2. Actually, there's a square button there, but so we don't have to enter 2, but for any other thing we have to use that box. So let's say equals, and then what I get is a fraction. But I don't want a fraction, so that's why I use this third key that I highlighted, the S to D, surd to decimal. And if I push that, it gives me a decimal version, and I push it back and it goes back to the fraction. So whenever you get something you don't like the look of, press that button and you'll get a decimal. 103.2, and I should apologise, I know these questions have been really washed out looking, but I needed to have a strong light to show my calculator. Okay, I hope that was helpful.